This is Madit Yel. I'm the host of the Leaders in Focus podcast, which brings you exciting stories from our members of South Sudan's diaspora, as well as guests who have interest in all issues related to South Sudan. My guest today is Mr. Daniel Akech Thiong. He's the founder of Sudd Conservancy. Welcome to Leaders in Focus podcast, Daniel.
Thanks for having me.
That's a pleasure. Thank you for taking the time. We actually went through a rebrand a few months ago. We used to be called the South Sudan Network podcast. And due to some change that we had some of the topics that we wanted to touch base on, including sometimes interviewing guests, who may not be South Sudanese, but have an interest or are experts on an issue that might be relevant to our socioeconomic and political affairs in South Sudan. We decided to rename or rebrand ourselves as the Leaders in Focus, where we bring in, personnel like yourself, who are working on some exciting projects, have gone through interesting experience and have something of value to offer our audience, who are mainly members of South Sudan's diaspora, as well as our guests. So thank you very much for taking the time. If you don't mind, I don't always do justice to introducing people. It's something always that I always leave out. So I would, if you don't mind, if you can introduce yourself, who is Daniel Akech Thiong?
Thank you so much for having me. My name is Daniel Akech Thiong. I was born in South Sudan, in Jonglei State. I grew up in Jonglei State until I was a teenager. And then I started my journey through Kenya. And then I ended up in the US in 2001. So that's really basically what I am. I stay now in California, and I'm a mathematics lecturer. I'm also finishing a doctorate in mathematics also. So that's what I am. And I have also been involved in working with refugee students in Kenya, from South Sudan, from Nuba Mountains, and also I have started gravitating toward conservation space. So I'm now in that sphere as well.
That's very interesting. Obviously, you touch base on a lot of things that I would love to, I'd love for yourself to elaborate on more later, especially the Sudd Conservancy. And you just spoke about how your journey started from South Sudan. If you could elaborate more on that beginning from South Sudan and you ending up in California, US. How long ago was that, and how was that journey exactly?
So back in South Sudan, our story, sometimes in the news, they are treated as if they are uniform, but they are a bit different. There were a big number of boys without parents who went to Ethiopia. They became known as lost boys, who arrived in 2001 and 2000 to 2001 in the US. But my story is a bit different. I stayed in the village. I was doing fishing as a boy, and then I was also a cattle keeper prior to that. And then during the war, we lost our cattle to conflicts, tribal conflicts, as well as fallout among the fighters. So we ended up withdrawing back to the Sudd, and that's where I lived for a number of years. And then by 1999, that's when I started making it out from the villages, from the Sudd area in Jonglei to Kakuma. So I actually took a plane from Panyagor to Kakuma to Lobeshogyo, and then I went to Kakuma. So I stayed in the camp for 2 years and got an opportunity to come to the US as a refugee. So that's that was my story. So it's a bit different from others, like my brother, who went through Ethiopia and they had to go on a very long journey to Kakuma. So my story is a bit different. Yeah.
Right. No, that's and that's common for most of our guests that I've interviewed that are from South Sudan. Just like yourself, I think the only difference is I took I took another route, right? Most South Sudanese would be either those who went, to East Africa, Ethiopia, or Kenya, got their UNHCR opportunity to immigrate into countries like the United States, the UK, Canada, or Australia. I myself, I took the northern route, which goes, through North Sudan. Most of us then end up going to Egypt, where there's a UNHCR office there that offers resettlement, and made my way here to the US. So same journey, just different routes, pretty much. So thank you for sharing that, Daniel. You come to the United States, I always find it that, and especially for a personal experience as well, you're being born in a different country, speaking a different language, different culture, and then, through certain circumstances, you find yourself in a different world, different country that has this different language, different culture. What was that transition like, coming to the US here and going to school and living and working here? What was that experience, some of the challenges as well as opportunities that you might have gone through?
Yeah, thank you. It's a really great question and not an easy one to answer, because not only did we take different routes to come to the US, we also had different backgrounds, educational backgrounds. I was actually born in Khartoum. My parents were educated, especially my dad. He was working there in Khartoum. So I was born there with my siblings. And we ended up going to South Sudan. Ended up tending after cattle. I ended up doing fishing. So up until 1999, when I was brought to Kakuma, I enrolled in 3rd grade at a refugee primary school called Buma. So 2 years later, I came to the US. My situation was that I was a grown up. I was in my late teenage, with very little education. Although I managed a bit to get up to skipping some classes, my educational background was so weak. But so I could not qualify because of age to start going to high school, but I could not go further. So that was a big challenge. And how I overcome that was really the opportunity, the people I met, the Americans who greeted us and afforded me opportunities. So I started working. The second week I arrived in the US, I already had a job at SeaWorld. And then from there, I met people who actually helped me to overcome the shortcomings, the educational loopholes that I had. So I was able to quickly catch up and ended up going to a community college and exit from there to go to university. So it was really a rare leap, because without the people I met, it would have been impossible, because my background was so against me, because I was lacking the prerequisites to be able to move on as quickly as possible. So that was my journey. So it was a bit of a cultural shock, but it's a story that I think it's an American story, because it was made possible here in California, where I'm still staying now. So.
Right. Yeah, no, that's you saying that you already had a job for you, and pretty much within the first week you had a job here in America. That must have been a great opportunity, obviously, as a recent immigrant, but at the same time, as you said, culture shock, not knowing what to expect, and you having to hit the ground running, so to speak. I think usually when you go to a different country, as a grown-up, as a teenager, as you said, much more aware of cultural nuances in your background, and I believe that makes it easy getting accustomed to your new reality. And I think that must have played a role, as it did for myself. Actually, when I came to the US, I came for school. I was 21 at the same time. So not only was I old enough, I also realized that I was old enough, to consume alcohol. So that was that was great news for me. Thank you for sharing that, Daniel. You touched base on education already. As you said, you were fortunate enough to pursue your education opportunities here. What exactly did you study in college, and what was that experience like for yourself, but also for your family? As in, what did that mean, that educational accomplishment for yourself and for your family?
It's looking back, I recently met an older cousin of mine back in the village. He told me he saw me rowing a boat in 1998, and he knew I was born in a hospital in Khartoum when he was there. And the transitions was you return back to the village, and I forgot everything about towns, and I was so comfortable rowing the boat, doing fishing. And he shook his head. He was like, he was in disbelief that this kid has to go to school. That's what he told me recently, that he saw that this was really, it was an okay life, but it's just for someone who was born near schools to just end up in the village with no prospects of going anywhere to schools. It was a big, shocking experience for him. But recently, he's so happy that I actually managed to catch up and I went back to school. So when I came to the US, it was I was so greedy to catch up with education. So I ended up going to community college. I worked hard, but people were really supportive of me. American families, they were making it so easy for me. One guy, a man called Jeff, gave me a job. And he was really generous with me with my time. The time he was asking me to do work, he allocated some times for me to study, and it was really helpful. So I ended up finishing community college, and in 2003, I enrolled at a small Catholic university. It's called University of San Diego, and I was majoring in 3 degrees. So I was majoring in mathematics, I was majoring in theology, I was majoring in philosophy. So it was a bit busy, but I had friends. So I enjoyed the experience. It was really a great way to get introduced to America. I learned a lot on campus and hanging out with friends. And yeah, I ended up actually only getting 2 degrees. I dropped philosophy, but I ended up getting a degree in theology and mathematics. Yeah, so that was my journey between community college and the 4-year college.
Yeah, no, that's quite an experience. I relate what it is like to have multiple degrees in college. I myself, I was a double major. I came in as a freshman with, I've already selected a degree, a bachelor's in business with a concentration in public policy and public service. But I had interest in economics. I had interest in economics due to some of the classes that I took in high school. And I just couldn't see myself graduating without a bachelor in economics at the end of my 4 years. So going into my sophomore year, I decided to add another degree, and that was economics. And I must say, it's not easy. With that one major that I had, during my first semester, my GPA was going up, but the moment I added that second degree, I could see some change going downward. And so I definitely, I can relate to what you went through. But the beauty of it is having that exposure, right? Not limiting yourself to only 1 degree, but learning as much as you can. And I'm sure that always sort of having multiple degrees that you're interested in sort of shapes, your worldview and how you approach work and, your thinking. So it's challenging, but exciting at the same time. Daniel, I would love to hear more about, highlights of your work experience. We're going to talk about the Sudd Conservancy, which you're currently working on and putting much of your time. But I can tell you've had, based on the degrees and the majors you've taken, you've had quite a journey of work experience. If you could highlight some of those exciting work experience that you've had prior to taking on the Sudd Conservancy?
Yeah, I think the first job I had was after finishing college was becoming a tutor for disadvantaged children, and majority of them were South Sudanese. So I was helping them with their homeworks. There was an American family that decided to do after schools programs, and they wanted someone who could actually teach physics and mathematics to these kids. I relate to them. So it was really a great experience. Some of them ended up going to colleges and graduating. And then after that, I went to a refugee camp to buy some books for refugee kids. So when I arrived there, I realized that the refugees, the students from South Sudan, were being told to go back because now they had their country, semi-autonomous regions, which was there was no civil war again. So they were being forced to leave Kakuma to go there, and some of them were already in third year, year 11, like it's called Form 3 in Kenya. So they were like telling me stories of how if they end up returning to South Sudan, they will never finish high school because there were no high schools. There was no infrastructure back in South Sudan. So I came back to California and told my friends that the money that I took for books, I took 4 kids and sent them to school, to boarding schools. So all my friends from San Diego came, American friends, and they ended up each person saying, I will take 5 of them, I'll take 10. The next day was like somebody wants to take 89 of them. So we ended up taking a lot of kids out of Kakuma to Nakuru and Nairobi and Eldoret and send them to boarding schools. So at the end, it was 350 plus children we ended up taking in 3 years from South Sudan and Nuba Mountains, the kids we could find in the refugee camps. So that was really eye-opening experience for me. I pulled these kids out. Some of them ended up in Canada on further scholarships. And now we are all friends on Facebook. They are making lots of changes. They are doing their own impacts, creating impacts in the society. So these programs, I ended up calling it working buildings. And what that means is that for me, I felt like there were a lot of investments in the facilities back in South Sudan. And then sometimes there is climate shocks, which will send like floodings that will close down the structures, or there's a violence and they end up being destroyed without being utilized, or there is shortage of resources to sustain those investments. So I came up with this idea of, okay, if you have some small money, forget about changing villages, forget about changing the whole continent, but focus on just one individual. And this one individual, the best thing you could do to a person is just like invest in them, in their education. So just one person at a time. And that is investing in a working buildings as opposed to like a steel building or a physical structure. So this investing in human infrastructure, that's what I ended up calling it, was one of the biggest ideas behind these things where we invite a friend, take on 1 or 2 children and just like mold them, educate them, and then they will sustain themselves. They will figure out what to do. So you don't have to go to Africa and build things for them. Build people, and they will decide what to build for themselves, and they will be able to actually sustain those things that will come from them. So that was one of the things I have been working on, and it's still there. It's a really great idea. It's so easy to sustain and to implement. So that was one of the first things I have been doing in Africa since 2007, and it's still going on. There are still 4 or 5 kids that are still finishing up in the programs since that time, but we have been producing a big number of people on that. So that's my biggest experience working with refugee youth. I also teach mathematics here at the University of Louvain. And I also taught for a year at another university in Pennsylvania, a place called State College. And I also taught in Colorado at Boulder for a year.
Whoa.
So the highlights of all this, it's really, I'm getting like diverse experience that are actually helping me a lot to see things that I would not have seen if I was just sitting in one place doing one thing. So interacting with these college kids from different villages, from different towns, in some areas, in some rural areas in America, you can actually call them villages. So it's a lot of experience, a lot of learning, and it has been actually shaping how I see the world. Besides the teaching mathematics, I'm also a writer. So I wrote a book about fear when it's being used by politicians to get things they want. So I've been doing that, and I sometimes actually do policy analysis for think tanks. So it's actually also opens some opportunities for me to interact with different group of people, the ones that are doing international development. Right. So for me, it's bringing all this together and try to figure out what is the best way to help, what is the best way to create impacts or to maximize impact, because sometimes the programs should be judged by the outcome, not by the initial design of what we are thinking here, in the comfort of our homes. So it's our houses. So that's basically my story. My professional story is just like trying to keep diverse interests and see what works. And really, the inspirations comes from my old man, my dad. My dad went to Khartoum in the 50s, and he was educated a little bit, but not like really seriously well educated. So he just wanted to get some tools, to use them to get a job and survive. So one day he ended up as a musician for a short time, and then he was working as a foreman in this factory, and ended up doing a number of other things. And one day a young man asked him, like, Thiong, I thought you were going to be a musician. What happened? How did you drop from those people, like that, those crew that you were actually working with? And he said, one of the things I do in my life is that don't stick to one thing if it is not working, if it is not really generating the results you need. Keep moving. Like you figure out what will work best for you. And I think that is really inspirational. So the idea that you cast your net so wide, rather than like limit yourself to just one thing. I don't want to be defined as a mathematician and nothing else. You cannot be just one thing and nothing else. It's not really good. So you have to be adaptable. So that's really what I have learned through what I'm trying to do professionally.
Wow, you've had I'm glad I had that question. You've had a myriad of interesting and various work experience, and I really like and applaud you for your educational work with refugee students back home in Africa. I mean, you and I can attest to the power of education. I myself, I was living in Cairo, Egypt, as a refugee. My family didn't have resources to put me into the best schools in Egypt, but I wasn't at a refugee school where, teachers there, as much as they weren't getting paid enough money, they had the passion and realized the cost and the work that they were doing, that they were dealing with disadvantaged kids or school children that didn't have enough resources to have the best books or the best education curriculum in the country, but they tried their best. They tried their best to gather as much as educational information as they could, that is competitive, that is compared to what other best schools in the country were studying. And that has shaped who I am today. My education journey, going to South Africa for high school, coming to the US for university. If it wasn't for that beginning, that school in Cairo, Egypt, where teachers put their heart out and gave us the best education they could, South Africa and the US wouldn't have been possible. So I applaud you for doing that work. I'm sure you're already seeing the impact that education and investment is having on some of those school kids that you sponsored. And I'm sure they will also realize the opportunity to go on and pass it forward to other students. So I just wanted to applaud you in that. Education is something that I really appreciate and value as someone who's gone through it. And I believe that's the best gift you can give someone. Daniel, to add on that work experience, you're currently working on a project called Sudd Conservancy. I quite know what the Sudd is in South Sudan, but if you could tell our audience what Sudd Conservancy is, your objectives, some of the success stories, as well as challenges that you faced so far, and really what are you trying to accomplish with the Sudd Conservancy? And as well, if you can go ahead, I know Sudd is something that has been on the news lately, depending on some of the conversations around it as an environmental heritage for South Sudan, as well as the region and the world. If you could tell our audience what Sudd is, and then what Sudd Conservancy as a project that you're doing around that is as well.
Thank you. It's really great questions, because I've been really interested in this for quite a while now. First things, what really brought me into conservation was I was in South Sudan, and I met some friend. It's an ecologist, it's an American ecologist. He wanted some help with wildlife organizations he was running. So I volunteered to help, and I ended up getting a job for a short time, which took me to some places in South Sudan, in Jonglei State, in Equatoria, in Barghazal, seeing wildlife, the state of wildlife in our country. So that was really what introduced me to the idea of the Sudd. The Sudd itself as an area is really, if you know the map of South Sudan, you go to Mangala, that's when you enter this swampy area. It's actually wetland. So you start in Mangala, and then you exit from this gigantic wetland in Malakal. So if you are a South Sudanese, that's really the area. And then the width of it, it expands. It could shrink, it contracts when it's a dry season, but it also expands. So people have been very interested in things like that. This is like Africa's largest wetland. And it's been always fascinating historians, people who want to kind of see what is happening. They look at the topography, how is this impacting, how is climate change is impacting these wetlands, and what are the roles to our to the entire ecology in the area? Like, what is the role of wetlands? So it's a very complex ecosystem that has lots of wildlife. It has a lot of environmental features like the forest. It has water. It has people. More than 1.2 million people live in that area. So this is like a really critical habitat, extremely important for the existence of the denizens, if you want to call the animals and people that. So everybody that lives there, the Sudd is playing a huge role. So people have been fascinated to try to understand really what is happening. How is it actually helping us? How is it actually sustaining us? What happens to it if we lose the water, if it's dried up? So people don't know really when it starts forming, but it's connected with the Nile. It's actually really the main thing that people talk about when they discuss the Nile. And if they're focusing on the water, they want to look at this gigantic wetlands that sits on the White Nile. So that's really what the Sudd is all about. People have been also looking at commercial interests in the area, like the water that is being held in the Sudd. It actually evaporates into the atmosphere, and it also brings rains into the regions. Not just like that particular spots, but the entire South Sudan is actually made wet due to this Sudd. And it's also if you're looking at the greenhouse gas, it's also playing a huge role because there have been a lot of aerial surveys that show that there are lots of bad gas that are actually kept in the Sudd. So if you dry it up, they will just like come out and will affect the entire environment. So there are lots of things that people want to understand about the Sudd. And so when I basically grew up there, I did not know. I know some of the records of like how the patterns of drying up, the patterns of flooding and stuff. But I with the tools that I have now, with the networks that I have been building, I'm interested in actually going back there to see what are the challenges and what can be done to understand thoroughly this place, at the same time to address those challenges. So that's really what the Sudd is. So what are those challenges in the Sudd? One is the climate shock. So the climate impacts, it can be felt, especially when it could be felt in places like the wetlands. If it is drying up, it will be a huge problem for the animals, for the environments, for people living there. If it is flooding right now, it will displace 800,000 people, close to 1 million people, and then those people are kind of going to contribute to a global crisis because displacements, people are displaced into like other areas where there will be a conflict among the hosts and the displaced people. So that is creating an induced climate shock conflicts. So sometimes when we talk about South Sudan, we only think, oh, these rebels are fighting each other or the tribes are on each other next. But there is also this climate shocks, which people are not talking about. So that you could only see it when you look at places like that. So, but how do you mitigate that? So that is calling for solutions. And also there is commercial exploitations, which is dealing with poaching of animals. Animals that are actually under threat of extinction are also being harmed by this commercial interest in the area, not only done by people within South Sudan, but it could even be like foreigners. So there is a lot of interest because there are species that are very rare. It can only be found in the Sudd. It has like a huge, amazing bird lives, this Sudd area. And then there are big animals like elephants, which contributes a lot to the ecosystems, are in the Sudd. About 75% of the entire population of elephant in South Sudan is in the Sudd. And then you have Nubian giraffes, you have lions, you have buffaloes, and some of those are actually threatened because of this commercial interest. And then you have the landscapes, which is also impacted by agricultural interests and extractive industries like oil extractions. It creates pollutions. So all these threats are there in the Sudd. And then there is natural extinctions of some of these species. What could be done to address those? So those are the kind of main challenges that we see there. The other things that I'm seeing in the Sudd is that the communities are naturally they are the reasons that we found those animals that we see there, or the environment is actually intact. But the way they've been treated traditionally, because I have experience working as a policy advisor for some of the wildlife organizations, is that the attitude toward local people is so negative that they are seen as, you create a national park, and there are three main big ones in South Sudan. One is in Lafon area. It's called Bandingilo by people who don't know history, but in their local language, this the Peri language, which is part of the Luo language. It's supposed to be called Burgilo, meaning it's the tomb of a guy called Gilo. Gilo is their ancestral hero. It's a national hero of the Luo people. So his tomb was in that area. And so it means Bur and then Gilo. So it's supposed to be Burgilo National Park. So it's one of the parks there. There is another one called Buma National Parks. And then in Bargazal, which is a huge one, it's called Southern National Parks. So those national parks are like the traditional way of conserving animals and environment. But the way they are done is that they are curved out in the jungle and the communities are outside the fence. And then nobody is interested in the communities. We're all interested in this, as if the communities are not part of that environment. So, and then the communities are made to feel like, oh, we are protecting animals from you, when it should be the other way, because it's the communities that are actually the reason there are those animals. Now, where the communities do not protect animals, animals are not there. So these are their traditional roles. So I'm thinking that we need to give these roles back to them. But they are lacking tools. They cannot really do conservations. They don't have the capacity. That's where resources should be mobilized to build them. A few other things that are seen as threats with the communities are guns. There's so many guns in the hands of the communities. And when I saw this, people think, oh yeah, with the guns, you cannot even invest, which is really negative. So I'm thinking, what if we entice the communities, tell them, this is your job, protect. Well, with their guns, they can protect the animals, but now it's creating jobs rather than just, it's just like, you don't get anything from it. So you entice the communities to be the one literally protecting the animals. So the guns, yes, I am not advocating for guns to be used, but it's a natural setting. It's like really the context in South Sudan that the communities are badly armed. They're actually been better armed than governments in some areas. So if you bring National Guards to protect the animals, then they will clash with the communities, and the communities will complain that we are not being given jobs, and then they will out guns the National Guard. So you're really not going to do a good job if you actually isolate the communities from this role of doing their traditional job of protecting their environments, because the animals are part of the community. The entire environment, it works, it cooperates. It's not like one group is working against the other. It's a system that if you remove human beings, it's not going to function the way it should function, because they are part of that ecosystem. So, and then the last thing, it's in South Sudan, laws are designed in favor of communities. This might have been an accident motivated by some political issues, but it's actually good, because that means the true custodians of the land, of the environment, are communities. So if you go to communities, you might be able to work much better. That this is your land, but here is how you should manage it. You have to follow this land use management. Those are the kind of things we want to put together and put the communities at the center. If you want to do conservation in the right way, communities should be at the center of everything, of biodiversity protections. So this is really what I'm advocating. And it's actually a new movement, because South Sudan is coming into this a bit late compared to Kenya, Tanzania, and a few other areas in the regions. Communities have already championed this, and this idea of community-led, not community-based, community-led conservations. So these things, we want to create conservation spaces where we say, like, protect these animals, protect these environments, do your development on these other sites, and then we come with tools to help you do it better. There are models that we want to bring to the communities, say, like, you're going to do this, you could benefit from it. Will create employment, will protect your environment, everything will work together. So that's really one of the things that I'm trying to build with the Sudd Conservancy. So now, with everything I have said, I mentioned a bit of insecurity. So that means there is a need for stability. I mentioned issues of conflicts because these societies are also facing societal collapse. You could see, like, extreme violence that used not to be like that. They were not on that scale, but the communities are now, like, robbing each other, cattle raids that are kind of like involving harming of the innocent people. So that means there is a need for stabilizations. There is a need for peace. There is a need for mitigating climate shocks. Like, how do you deal with people that are flooded out of their homes? You just leave them like that, or do you figure out other tools that we could use? So we are going to introduce technology into this. So the Sudd is kind of like a multidisciplinary entity that we are creating, we are involving ecologies, like well-leading ecologies. We are also involving people with technology who are actual directors of technologies in some European countries. There is one guy who is also a co-founder. It's also leading ecologies with 25 years of experience managing this park. So we are coming back out and say, okay, let's South Sudan is ready for this type of conservation. It's not the other traditional way of doing it has not been working very well. Let's not antagonize the communities. Let's hand it to the communities and come to them building their capacity. And then it's going to open up a lot of opportunities for a lot of people, because there are a lot of complex knowledge that is needed. It's no longer about studying wildlife. You need mathematicians like myself who can actually help with doing models for climate models, so we could be able to actually precisely know when is the floods coming. So what are the patterns of, how do we actually live in an environment without really being surprised? So we could use those tools, and there are people that are interested in joining this. So that's really what the Sudd Conservancy is all about, is the idea of we're creating a nature-based solutions. In South Sudan, for a very long time, the only thing we know is extractive solutions. Everything that we get in South Sudan is through extraction. We have to like rip something out of the earth, and that's how we make money. Now we're saying, no, you could actually make money in a very clean way. And then this, we call it green oil. So you could actually, nature-based solutions that are actually going to get funding, a lot of money. They can bring you real money. And that's what the kind of job as the leader of this entity, I have to ensure that the communities will see results plus money. They cannot see one and not the other. So if you do something like that, and the communities are going to emulate this in other areas, for example, there's a group doing this in Lafon now, and I've been helping them with writings and with designs and giving them guidance together with my team from the Sudd. So while we are focusing on the Sudd, we are also giving guidance to other emerging community-led conservancies. And I've been just been shown some another documents which I've been looking at in the last few days from a Newark area from Pochala, and they are doing very similar things also. The young people there are being inspired to do that. So we are encouraging people in Mechra, in Chambe areas, in other areas in South Sudan, in Malakal, if they want to try to do something, we at the Sudd Conservancy will actually not see them as competitors. It's all one. It's and we're going to voluntarily help with designing things for them, and we're benefiting from the regions too. The Kenyans are also they're backing us. The Ugandans also, even Rwanda. Recently, I met people in DRC who are interested in holding hands together and getting this to work. So putting our communities at the center of conservation. And this is very important because one of the global crises the world is facing now is biodiversity loss. That we are actually losing what the world used to have. And we cannot survive if we just let it go like that. So now this is why it's important to call for biodiversity conservation. And that the only way you would do it effectively is that we in Africa take the center stage, because while we emit less green gas into the atmosphere, we are the most impacted people in the world. Why? It's not because it's Africa. It's just because we don't have the tools to address some of these challenges that comes there. Like if people don't have water, there is nothing you could do. But if you have technology, you might be able to actually survive even in the desert. Where I stay in California, we produce the biggest percentage of fruits in the US, and we are in a desert. And the reason we do this is because of technology. So that's why technology is very important to be adapted and help this community. So if we put communities at the center of conservation, everything will work out well. Thank you.
Right. That's a gigantic project, I must say. The Sudd in itself is a huge natural gift to South Sudan and the region and the world, I must say. Interesting work around there, especially with the South Conservancy that you're involved in. And I also like the fact that you're trying to include the community. I mean, it just makes sense that it is a community-led instead of a community-based initiative, because these are the people that have lived around this environment. They are pretty much the experts, right?
Correct.
Around the environment and the animals and the trees and all the nature around it. And so it makes sense that they should be the ones leading it, and then with the support that comes in with the likes of the South Conservancy and many other partners. And as I said, it seems like a big project. Where does the government of South Sudan comes in here? Are you guys in contact? So if you've had some leads where you're trying to involve them in one way or another, because it seems it is a national project in a sense that involves the community. So have you guys had any conversations in terms of partnering with them and seeing what solutions you could bring together?
Yes, totally. There are three stakeholders. One is the community, and there is the private sector, and then the government. The government is divided into like various levels. There is the state government, and then there is the national governments. All of them have a big interest in protecting the environment and protecting the people, and at the same time as promoting development. Because in South Sudan, they have a really great models. It's just not being implemented, but it's there. I've seen it with the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, and also even in the Office of the President. The idea of peace through development, that you could achieve peace if you pursue development. The only thing that could be modified about that is maybe to say peace through sustainable development, because the development has to be sustainable. Right. It has to actually, it cannot destroy itself, because some developments actually become destructive, and then you can no longer actually survive on the basis of that, those infrastructure you're building. So we've been talking with the governments. There are a lot of government supports for these initiatives. First of their support is actually making us legally registered. So we are now a legally registered entity in South Sudan. So that is already like a blessing from the government. The other things we will do is build these collaborations at the lowest level with the communities, the community stakeholders, with the government of the states, and with the national government. So that all those we are already kind of laying them out. And it's a very good question, because that's first of the things that we were asked by the donors. If the government is okay with this these kind of models. And yes, they are even putting it in the bills. It has not yet been signed, but these community-led conservancies are now actually part of the bills that is being discussed by the Parliament, the National Assembly. That so they are all open to this, and we are in touch with all the stakeholders from the government about how to go about this. After all, we are actually helping them make their job a bit easier, because if the youth are employed, less rebellions and other crises that would scare the government. So it's a part of the crisis in South Sudan is like so many youth are sitting down doing nothing. And if you create these opportunities for them, even I was thinking, if you improve the grazing, that for the cattle, you improve the processing of the fish, all the things that the youth wants to be able to create jobs for themselves, you actually take some of the money meant for conservation into actually this kind of developments, improving ways of creating lights, cleaning water, and things like that. Those are part of the principal objectives. Is you cannot really get people who are suffering. You cannot tell them you will not succeed. You cannot tell them not to kill animals if they have no other ways of living. So this is actually a huge service for the government. And the government is very supportive of it because I was a policy advisor with the previous wildlife organizations. I have seen the government cooperating. When I went to Buma, I went with 5 generals from the government side, from wildlife, and we went to a place called Lafon, the same, and all these ideas, I discussed them with them. Because although I was advisor for the organizations, it's called Wildlife Conservation Society. It used to be called New York Zoological Society. It's an American organizations. But the government, it's also getting working in partner with these experts. So one other thing that is coming up, which I saw in Rwanda recently, is that even the US government is not willing to support entities that are not working with the government. Because before it used to be like, you delegate the entire management of your natural resources to a foreign NGO, and the government will not do anything. That has changed now. The only way you can guarantee is actually co-management. If you involve everybody, that's how you do it. And what I'm thinking is like, take that much lower, like involve the communities, not just like partners in Juba doing their things. You involve everybody at the grassroots, and it's really successful. So yes, we are in touch with the government.
Yeah, that's the great project, and I like how you're approaching it, right? You know, as a multilateral role and approach and solution, because you understand, you know, how big this project would be and how important it is. The Sudd Conservancy and the Sudd Swamp for South Sudan, the region, and the world. Daniel, as someone who is part of the diaspora and is now going back home and doing such great projects as the Sudd Conservancy, in addition to other projects like education project with refugee kids back home in South Sudan and the region. I'm one of the people who believes that South Sudan's most important development or asset is its members of the diaspora, right? It's the people who have left the country, whether due to conflict or they just wanted to go abroad and pursue bigger education and economic opportunities. And with that comes the expertise, right, that we can take back home right now and then build this young nascent country that is hungry for development, all the different infrastructure projects that we can do there. As someone who's already there and has seen the opportunities and has come up with solutions, what would you say to diaspora members who think there's nothing for them that they can do back home? How would you encourage them to go back there, and what kind of opportunities that are there for diaspora members to get involved in and perhaps offer their expertise and come up with some solutions?
Yeah, it's a really great question. Everybody is interested in a question like an answer to a question like that not just in South Sudan, but in the entire regions also. The way you convince people is you show them what has worked. And the success of the Sudd, I have spent 8 months in East Africa trying to get it off the ground. And there are some promises that it's getting there, that is going to get off the ground. Once it gets off the ground, the expertise is going to come from the diaspora. You said it right, that these are actually very, that's how I view resources. A country does not have oil, does not have to have all these natural resources to be considered a rich country. Otherwise, DRC would be a rich country. It's very rich in resources and is the poorest, has the poorest people. That's a contradiction.
Right.
You could almost say the same in lots of rich countries in Africa. So what I want to see happen is that we tap into this diaspora resource and bring people to work with the Sudd on various levels, that nobody's going to actually tell them like, don't do this, because this is a completely different space. It's a space that needs modelings, it needs scientists, it needs engineers, it needs everybody. And storytellers like yourself would have a role also. So we bring people like that on board, and then they see, oh wow, we are doing this and nobody's actually telling us to stop it. So that is one way to convince people. But there are opportunities there that I've seen when I was there on the ground. that sometimes the difficulty is that you are in diaspora. You have to depend on waking up every morning, go to work from 9 to 5. That is already a problem because you're not going to get enough money to be able to explore, to be able to actually go out there and see opportunities. Because the longer you stay, the more opportunities that you see. Because you cannot just show up at a city today and look around and say, oh, here is the money here and there is the money there. I've seen people saying in rank, one guy told me that money, if you work hard, it just flies following you, just like you move around with it. So there are opportunities there, but they need some investment, they need some capitals. There is also a need for a network. You build coalitions. You cannot survive alone. Our people back home, part of the challenge they are facing, which is what we are facing also, is this idea that we have a cake that is shrinking and there are growing hands that are coming near it. It's not going to work like that. So this piece of cake that people are kind of fighting over is too small. We maybe need to leave it aside and then look for other opportunities. There are opportunities even in the regions where you could work in Kigali as a South Sudanese, as a diaspora member. So your project does not have to be just about South Sudan. I have friends here in the US, they are building estates in Kenya. And South Sudan is near here, but it's still, it's an opportunity, it's a business opportunity. So there are opportunities if we work together, look at the Sudd things. The model is encouraging other people to build. And I even go out and say, like, here is what the concept notes look like. It took me 6 months to put these concept notes together with 2 other experts. So it's not an easy work, but that works if you could replicate that. Doesn't have to be necessarily conservations, but other areas, and we encourage each other. I'm sure we'll be able to break into like things that will work, because part of the problem in South Sudan, we're not producing anything. We're just like collecting this oil money, and then it's a shrinking pie. It's not really growing, and then we're getting more and more actors. Now the only way people look at opportunities, you go get a gun and become a rebel, and then you get a space to go cheer in the government. That is not sustainable. That's not sustainable development. Yeah. So it's a really great question, but I want to actually show it by making these 2 things work, and maybe bring some people over and have them work, do some scientific work, the works that is not anybody in the village will do. Of course, people in the village will have their roles too, because there's always a space for you. It's like you're doing fishing. So you go to these small lakes, there are other lakes. That's basically what I'm saying. It's, we need to look hard enough, but I understand the challenges that if you don't have the capital, if you don't have the infrastructure, if you don't have the institutions behind you, it's not easy. But if we build coalitions, that's it. This is really bringing opportunities, like what you just did. You are talking about the Sudd Conservancy, and people will hear about this, and they might form some ideas. It's not everything that I have said that actually will be very useful, but I'm sure there will be 1 or 2 things that someone could take out of these conversations and turn them around. It will complement whatever they were already thinking. So if we use our thinking, we build coalitions, we share information, that's power. That's really how we're going to get back to do things. I've seen that in Rwanda, in Kenya, where people are just coming back. You're not coming back as a politician. So of course, people who want to go into that are free to do it. But there are other spaces where you could just go and try to do your own things. Nobody's going to stop you. It's when you are actually going for this drinking pie, maybe that's when you could actually be fighting with people who are already there and they don't want to be displaced. But there are opportunities out there. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. I mean, you said it better, right? You know, there's a shrinking pie, and in fact, there's a joke around our community that I hear often is that most South Sudanese have either studied or want to study political science, and that's because they want to go back home and be the leader, the change maker. And I understand, right? As a majority of people who have left the country, and the common story is political displacement, right? It's in everyone's mind and heart that the solution is a leadership, and it's a political solution. But as you said, it's a shrinking pie, There's a lot of ways you can make an impact and make a difference, without being a politician and going directly into politics. So that's a great note there, and I hope some of our listeners, and especially member of diasporas, would use their work experience, their expertise to go back home and actually do something that is a private initiative where if it requires you to work with the government, great. If not, you're alone, you can do that work without anybody feeling like you're competing with them, right? Or you're a threat. And you will make an impact, you make a difference. In fact, sometimes even more than someone who is in politics, right? And we understand the challenges of politics and making things work. So, I hope more members of our diaspora like yourself will go back home and get involved and help our country achieve its development goals. Daniel, we're coming to the end of our episode. It's been great so far. This is a question that I always ask some of our guests on the podcast, and you've touched based on it earlier, using your dad and his experience as something that has motivated you to do all these great projects that you're involved in. The question would be, having been born and lived in South Sudan, coming to the U.S., getting your education and working here, and now going back home, how has that journey shaped you, and what would you consider to be your true north, or the motivation? What keeps you up at night and lets you do all these great, interesting projects that you're involved in?
It's sometimes they say life is short, and you have to make the most out of it. It's a question of you went to the seashore and you're walking, it's wet, you're leaving footprints, and they could be easily washed away if they're not deep enough. So that's really what life is all about. It's like you think about, really, is anyone going to think about what I'm doing now, 25 years after I'm dead? What about like 75 years? What about 100 years? So the more years you could actually exist in the minds of people afterwards is really what is driving a lot of people, not just me. It's the idea that you want to leave something behind that will grow when you're gone. And that is not, you're not going to accomplish that by becoming a minister or even a president, because you could be a president and you are long forgotten. You ask people in the US to count the number of presidents, you will know that impacts are different when they actually only remember people like Lincoln, a few others. So it's really the drive. It's the idea of leaving something behind that could actually inspire other people to want to do things. And then those people will actually carry you, your name and your legacy forwards. And that's really the kind of impact. I don't think it's a good idea to just impact people who are living. You have to also impact people who are not yet born by what you are trying to do. So that's really really the true north for me, is the idea that what I'm trying to do, it might be small, but I want it to grow long after I'm gone. It's not just about me. It's about my contribution to our community, to our global community as well. So that's that. And if what I'm doing is not working, I go back to my dad's idea, give it up, try something else. It does not mean you are a failure. You are just like trying to figure out what will actually create the biggest impact that you could actually leave behind and to grow. So
life is too short indeed, and I believe the only way, as you put it, to prolong that experience is legacy, leaving something that will last you and continue to touch and impact generations to come. That brings us to the end of our episode, Daniel. But before I let you go, you're doing a lot of great experiences, a lot of great projects, and I would love some of our listeners and audience to follow you in the world of social media. So if you could just let us know, if someone wants to reach out to you and get connected with you, where would they go?
I'm on Facebook, but it's mostly kind of like with only friends. But my name on Facebook is Daniel Akech Thiong. So that's how you could find me. You could just like search. That one will lead to my Facebook page. I'm also on Twitter, but I use it very minimal. But I'm there. So it's called the Twitter handle is called Jonathan. You could share it. I actually sent it to your email with them. But the full name is also there. If you could search by Daniel Akech Thiong, it will also turn up the Twitter too. So those are the two social media links that I'm using. So Facebook
Great.
and Twitter. Yeah.
Great. And for our audience, I'll also make sure to add the handles to our audio podcast. That brings us to the end of this great and beautiful conversation with Daniel. He's already talked about some of his most important projects that he's currently working on, which is the Sudd Conservancy, as well as other projects, him being a writer, being an advisor in the world of global development or international development. Feel free to find this podcast. We'll be on Anchor FM. You can also find us on Android, if that's the platform you use. We're also on Apple Podcast, and we'll post this video version on our YouTube channel at Leaders in Focus podcast. And also feel free, we are part of the Sawasawa Network, which is a South Sudanese-based media platform and program here in North America. I would encourage you to look them up and watch some of their programs there as well and interact with them. Feel free to leave us a review and comments so we can improve this project. We would love to hear what you think of our episodes and some of the topics that we should be discussing. For that, I'll just leave it there. Thank you very much for listening. And for now, take care of yourself. And if you can, take care of someone else. Thank you and have a great day.